We in the developed world are like homeowners, Isabel Wilkerson writes, who inherited a house on a piece of land, but whose soil is unstable, loam and rock. Not one of us was here when this house was built, but here we are, the occupants of a property with stress cracks and bowed walls, and fissures built into the foundation. This metaphor from Wilkerson is powerful in understanding the caste system that we find ourselves in. While we or our ancestors might not have been involved in its construction, we inherit a system that has been in development for centuries and generations. Caste is the house in which we now live. And our society is changed now in such a way where we have never known anything different from the false hierarchy and divisions that uplift some and dehumanize others. Many of you have engaged with our congregation-wide read of Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents. This morning, we're delving into greater depth in this book and what it means for the United States to be existing and functioning through a caste system. Acutely, we're looking at the costs of caste, the heartbreaking and tragic losses as a result of a system that is insidious, self-enforcing, and innate to how we live and breathe in this nation. Casteism itself is more than a varied form of racism. It is a different beast entirely. Historically speaking, caste predates the concept of race by thousands of years. Whereas the concept of race and whiteness is only several centuries old, caste is ancient. We see caste systems develop with similar principles time and time again, with the famous examples of the Indian and Nazi Germany caste systems. Race itself dates back to the transatlantic slave trade, where the advent of blackness and whiteness became a form of socialized power and differentiation. Instead, Wilkerson finds that caste is a term that is both more specific and descriptive to our present system. In her words, caste and race are neither synonymous nor mutually exclusive. They can and do coexist in the same culture and serve to reinforce each other. Race in the United States is the visible agent of the unseen force of caste. Caste is the bones, race, the skin. Race is what we can see, the physical traits that have been given arbitrary meaning and become shorthand for who a person is. Caste is the powerful infrastructure that holds each group in its place. Part of what is so disturbing and troubling about caste is how difficult it is to see in light of overt racism. While overt racism itself is visible, we don't always see the subtle and regular ways in which caste operates. This is part of what makes caste so insidious as a system. We don't recognize caste as something personal or hateful. We see it as the way that things are, the structures that have been in place for so long that they are comfortable and unimposing. To confront casteism versus to confront racism involves greater and deeper mechanisms. And while it is good to be attuned to the ways that racism and racial injustice manifest in our society, we must also be attuned to the wider context. Quite simply, racism cannot describe the vast and deep historic systems that keep Black people and other non-white groups subjugated and oppressed. To simply stop at race is to see the system only skin deep. We must also look at the ways in which injustice and oppression manifest in our society's very bones. Now that we've talked a bit about what caste is and how it can be understood differently from racism and race, let's explore the pillars that keep and uphold a caste system in its place. You can imagine these 8 pillars as the frames and joists of the house that we've inherited, a house that has been designed through looking at other houses just like it. We can understand these 8 pillars when looking at them in 3 main groups. And I give credit to Emmylou for dividing these into 3 main categories. Pillars involving physical characteristics, pillars due to one's worthiness, and pillars of enforcement. These first 3 physical pillars involve what is perceived as divine will and laws of nature, heritability, and inherent superiority. In the example of India's caste system, the highest caste, the Brahmin caste, were created from the mouth of the Lord Brahma, with the others from the lower and less favored parts of the body. This was established as an order that was seen as divinely instituted, with the untouchables being from even below the feet of the servant caste. These castes were then passed on through generations. Children inherited these castes from their fathers, and there was no way of moving in or out of these inherited castes. This was prescribed to you based on how you were born within the same social hierarchy. The dominant castes are seen through a lens of superiority. Simply by virtue of being born into this higher caste, one is seen as inherently superior, whereas others inherently inferior. In the 2 pillars relating to one's worthiness, we have ideas of both purity and pollution, as well as a hierarchy of jobs and occupations. In our caste system in the United States, purity and pollution can be seen in the laws of Jim Crow. Bloodlines around whiteness that are policed in terms of even just a single drop of non-white blood. Rules around where one could eat, sit, drink, even go to school or work were regulated in terms of purity, with separate areas for both blacks and whites. Our caste in the United States is built on this notion that whiteness equals purity. To be anything other than white is to be equated with pollution. Because of this worthiness based on blood, this affects how a person can even find work. Even today, we see examples of how black and non-white groups are often kept within lower paying jobs or positions than their white counterparts. Even the social value of these jobs is lower, knowing that there are some jobs that are simply undesirable. Jobs that our caste has no issue with how we confine black, indigenous, and people of color to these undesirable positions. The last of these pillars relating to enforcement of caste involve the control of marriages and mating, dehumanization and stigma, as well as terror and cruelty. In the caste system of Nazi Germany, we can see how acutely these enforcement tactics were employed to perpetuate and enforce this social order. Starting from the definition and isolation of the Jewish people as the lowest caste, this caste was redefined in terms of being lesser than human. Stigma surrounded being a Jew in a society where dehumanization was enforced through incredible acts of murder, cruelty, and violence. It was enshrined in regulations and laws around who one could marry and have children with. The castes themselves could not marry outside of the boundaries of these groups. And more disturbingly, as some of you have mentioned to me in your shock and surprise, the Nazis designed their caste system after looking at the dehumanization and terror found in how black people were treated in the Jim Crow South. In fact, the Nazis were even astounded with the terror and cruelty that American blacks faced. Taken from our own caste system's playbook, there is evidence that points to how American society, even from its early design and founding, inspired the social ordering of Nazi Germany. This is troubling, to say the least. So how does the perpetuation and enforcement of caste cost us as a society? What are the costs of caste and that we are only now beginning to realize, now that we have a better name for such a far-reaching and interwoven system of oppression? To invoke the words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. In this sense, society itself hurts as a result of caste, even for those in dominant castes. Members of a dominant caste inevitably work against their own best interests in trying to perpetuate and enforce it. In upholding a system that gives them power, worth, and dominance, privileges that could be afforded to all are relegated to just a few. The overall welfare of society suffers with the ways in which caste functions and sustains itself. In addition to society's welfare, the stories we tell of our history are also a cost of caste. We in the United States are just beginning to unlearn some of these false understandings of our nation's history. Not only has slavery itself been downplayed in history books, we as a nation are hesitant to even look back on our past. You can see examples of this with the current arguments surrounding critical race theory and how race is taught and talked about in schools. Because we are unable to fully examine our history as a nation, we cannot see the full picture and scope of just how much caste is hindering our progress. We cannot know if in our present, if we will not look out at our past. And if we are to disrupt caste, we will have to do so looking at our past unflinchingly. Though most importantly, the single most devastating cost of caste is the cost of human life. Exclusion itself costs lives up and down the caste system, and this is shown in research from the physician Jonathan Metzl, who concluded that health policies in Tennessee that affect access to health care and coverage may have cost the lives of as many as 4,599 African Americans between 2011 and 2015. And this is joined with as many as 12,013 white Americans, more than double this loss. Even looking at long-term health impacts, high blood pressure, diabetes, and other diseases disproportionately affect Black people and communities of color versus whites. Wilkerson shows the cost of human life in terms of a great loss of potential. She cites the life of Albert Einstein, a member of a subordinate caste in Germany's caste system, because he was Jewish. Believed to have been one of the greatest scientists and minds to have ever lived, so many other countless brilliant minds are also lost because of caste. The potential of so many Blacks and non-whites are stymied by caste, and in turn, our progress as a society and world are also stymied in unknown and unknowable ways. There are immeasurable costs to caste that we cannot fully know or fathom, though the greatest of these costs is the cost of human life. As Unitarian Universalists, we believe wholeheartedly in the inherent worth and dignity of every person, regardless and in spite of one's perceived social position or rank. We believe that each of us possesses an innate sense of worth and value simply by virtue of being born a human being. This faith in the world and the worth of human life, especially for those who are dehumanized and deemed lesser than in our society, is one such remedy for caste. As Wilkerson posits, caste depends on dehumanization itself. It works on a never-ending loop and cycle, a wheel that will continue to turn and revolve unless we find ways to put on the brakes. So where do we go from here? How can we hold hope in a world of tomorrow with the enormity of caste that we are tasked with uprooting ourselves? We must find ways, as Wilkerson writes, to see through the layers of a caste system that has more power than we as humans should permit it to have. We must be able to look at the system from up on the balcony, to look over its workings and see how it operates, both in ways seen and unseen, in order to disrupt it. In this process, we may finally glimpse these further costs of caste and how these continue to halter life, and society's ultimate flourishing. Up here in northern Michigan, we must look hard to examine the ways that casteism operates. So often we might point to people in our communities and neighborhoods and say that Black, Indigenous people, and people of color aren't present. In doing this, we erase the abundance of diversity found even within our own midst, even if we don't fully realize it. There are Black, Indigenous people, and people of color in our communities. Claiming that diversity is scarce does not excuse us from the hard work of examining and dismantling caste. It means that we must work harder, in fact, to ensure that housing in our area is affordable to non-white people. It means that we must find ways to broaden voting rights in our communities and the access of the vote for communities of color. We must continue to face head-on the systemic injustices that caste imposes on those of lower castes. Yes, this work is individual, but it's also collective. We cannot overthrow and oppose this caste system if we aren't all in this together. To close, I want to bring you back to that earlier metaphor of the house that we've inherited. Though we didn't construct it, we are still tasked with improving it. We are in this house together, and famous words hearken that a house divided within itself cannot stand. May you not lose heart or be afraid by this enormous undertaking. We are being called to take apart that which has persisted for generations and centuries. In the end, may you hold this unshakable faith in the worth and dignity of every person. As Unitarian Universalists and as human beings, may we work tirelessly to ensure that Black lives do matter. May we show up and bear witness to the ways that caste both dehumanizes and kills Black lives. The killings of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Daunte Wright, to name only a fraction. May we create a house that is worthy of their memory. A home where hierarchy and status cannot determine your worth, the jobs or positions that you hold, the places you live, or even where you can go in society and feel safe. May we endeavor to disrupt this system by speaking life to a lifeless and costly order. And in turn, may we transform this world for the better, knowing that the work will never be done until the sacredness and worth of each life is both treasured and protected. May it be so, and amen.